and answers, either in the form of comments or in the form of questions. Okay.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
Just start one.
Thank you very much. You're welcome. Oh my God. Yeah, I just stepped into the room. Yeah. It's a tough one. I was actually struck, especially in the talks later today as well, because there's so many great talks today. This tension between sort of continuity, innovation, and integration, and I think to me they're all really important. So like we do have to innovate. So don't get me wrong. If in case you had this morning, I think innovation is really, really important. But if we don't integrate it with the systems that we've already got going properly, then it's kind of pointless. We're just going to be kind of measuring similar things or slightly different things with new technology. So we've got to do both. So what we need to do is meet that challenge. Maybe other people would like to, God, I don't know whether you agree or disagree about that. It's tough, but it needs to be done. And it's actually, it's quite inspiring. Obviously, a meeting like this is inspiring. I just want to say thank you to everybody, just for being a really inspiring bunch of folk today. That's what we need to do. It's really hard, but I'm optimistic today that we can do it.
Thank you, Oliver. Well, I agree with you and with all the talks that we have been looking today. It's amazing the amount of data, monitoring, modeling, and things that are going on different scales and different biomes. And I think it's a real challenge to put everything together and to try to start to do a big network of people, because we are not expert on everything. Finally, it's nice to have this type of collaborations and this type of networking to go one step forward, understanding complex ecosystems as forests. So,
okay, I think I'm gonna add to Alva's comment that we need to improve a little bit communication between disciplines. So, as a remote sensing scientist, it's always I speak in technical terms, and talking to people working mainly in the field, maybe we use different terms to explain the same thing. So, improving communications, not only of opportunities, but also limitations of certain methods, I think is very important to go beyond what we have at the moment.
Yeah, I exactly wanted to say the same thing, but I can no. But I think what is important not only to the communication between remote sensing and the ground measurement, but also the communication between the remote sensors, the ground measurements, and the modelers. And I think the modelers usually speak a completely different language. So I think this is super important to have this, like what we call model experiment or model data integration, to really that people that are doing the measurements know what modelers want to have or how we simplify in our models. And the modelers can learn or better understand which super small scale processes might be super important to have in our models. So I think that would be one important point.
Great. I would like to echo one of Ida's comments on the place value theory, which is very important, I think. All of the science we're doing is quite diverse, and we have this very different perspectives and scales, but at the heart of it, the reason why we're going out in the field and collect data is because we like the place we are going to. So this is probably the most valuable asset that we have. This is why the BIFoR Phase project is what it is, and why so many people are going there. It's because this is just a place, but it's taking value. So in this light, I think this is going back to the discussion we had this morning and yesterday. We cannot spread too much our effort into thousands and thousands of places because we are a limited community. And this is probably an argument to be made to concentrate our effort to certain places. How many places is to be discussed, and probably the community needs to be more engaged. But this is also this challenge of focusing to places that we know we're going to on a regular basis, and we're actually measuring in the long run to do, like in the LOPE project, where we can do phenology monitoring for 40 years and not for 4 years. This is what we are after, I think.
Maybe we should have started from this end, so I would still have something to say. Yeah, but first of all, I'd like to kind of just echo what was said before about communication and kind of communication, especially between disciplines. If we think about like going from like very practical forest science to remote sensing and ecology and modeling, I think there's a lot of information in all of these fields that would be very useful for the other fields that just doesn't like, it just doesn't get to the right ears. So that's the communication point that was already mentioned. And then maybe, one of the kind of things that's been discussed a lot in this meeting is the question of data, of course, in terms of plot data, long-term measurements, and the remote sensing part, and also like especially when you think about the human effect. Yeah, of course, depending on what region you are looking at, the kind of human influence is kind of more important or less important. But I think it's for globally forests, it's important everywhere, and there is also like a clear communication problem that a lot of the information and data about, for example, forest management and forest use, and also like importance of forests for people that we heard from today's presentations, it's very difficult to kind of take that and use it in large scale studies, transforming our understanding of global forests. So I think that's a big challenge to kind of bring all this together.
I think my job is going to be wrap up, because I just want to echo, but yeah, 2 key points, I think, linking back to what Oliver said about integration, is ensuring we can have like a holistic approach that we are assessing forest health and focus on multiple indicators. And that is integration across disciplines. As you said, modelers, remote sensors, field ecologists, but also ensuring, given that forests are more than our ecological research laboratories, they are the house of people that depends on them. So I think that highlights the importance of working with social scientists, and linking back to communication that you said is like, how can we increase the communication also beyond academia, making sure you're translating our work here to make things happen on the ground, to make the action that Alexander highlighted. I think, yeah, that's what I think.
Thank you. Any comments from the audience? Rich?
No, it's okay, because you need to reply. I'll hold it.
Okay. I just want to endorse what Anya said, but I'll come at it from the perspective as a field experimenter, where she's coming at it from a modeler. But I think in all these kind of, well, like BIFoR or any other kind of experiment like that, model data integration is really, really important for both the modelers and the experimenters. And it can't be you get all the data at the end of the experiment, you turn it over to the modelers and let them make sense of it. It can't be the modelers in the beginning say, here, send me all this data and we'll do something with it. It has to be a continued and constant discussion. And I think everyone benefits from it. The modelers get a much better understanding of the limitations of the data, what's possible, what's not possible. The experimenters get maybe a better feeling for sources of variation, because of course models always need to simplify, right? And simplify means you're ignoring certain sources of variation, but understanding what happens in that level is really critical. Now, where I worked before, we had a large modeling team and a large field experiment team all housed in the same place. So we interacted on a daily basis, which is great. Not everyone has that kind of setup, but whatever you can do to get together on a really constant basis throughout the experiment, I think is really ideal. We used to say, take a modeler to lunch. So.
Maybe I think this is not only relevant for such experiments like phase experiments, but this could also be relevant for these inventory plot measurements and simulating them and see what measurements could additionally be necessary to improve the models to really profit from such inventory plots, or the same with remote sensing data, have a close collaboration with modelers.
Oh gosh, what are you doing? So this is from jolly good. This is from Sylvia Calderaro, and she asks, I think this is responding to Jerome's comment, are we really a limited community? Surely there are local scientists everywhere. There are forests who would be happy to be involved in monitoring efforts. For Jerome.
Yes, I agree. No, the point I was trying to make is that there is really a value to invest a lot of efforts in limited places, not only because we are a limited community as scientists, but also because we want to invest in the long run, and we cannot. It's not possible to spread the efforts everywhere all the time. So this is, in this sense, no, community engagement is a different topic, it's a very important one, of course. And citizen science is very important, but you cannot do it everywhere all the same. Those in different places, you have to acknowledge that some places are not, you have to really adjust these tools. So it's probably quite easy in the UK at the moment, and some countries there are some engagement already. It may be more difficult in other places. One concrete example is phenology, where you could easily think of a citizen science program. In terms of tree measurement, I'm more skeptical that you can engage in citizen to measure plots accurately, especially given Oliver's pictures in the morning where you have to climb like 15 meters. I think there's a little bit of insurance risk involved and all sorts of things that I don't want to get my head around. But maybe you can comment, Oliver.
Thank you, Jerome. Thank you, Sylvia. It's a really good question. I mean, so I agree with Jerome that this, in a way, there are two ways of coming at it. So there's the top-down method, which we have to have. So we have to standardize techniques. We have to have real data quality assurance, and by layering all these different observation technologies and modeling and so on in a few places, we learn so much more than by doing it separately, right? So that's really critical. And on the other hand, we have to create the space for the more bottom-up work to emerge. And it's a bit crass of me, but just a little small advert for forestplots.net. Is that if you have plots and you want to join that network, we're very welcoming in that sense. It doesn't mean there's any money, because there isn't really any money, but in terms of helping to manage data and to share it and to connect, it's actually really, really valuable. So, and I suspect, and I'm sure that in terms of phenology, there are similar networks emerging that are actually helping to build that bottom-up science. So we kind of need both. And I think if we do just one or the other, we haven't got the whole picture and never will.
We have one more question from the audience, then a comment from Alexander, and then we move to the next question. So there was, I think Mojga was first.
Yeah. Okay. So my comments is like, how do we make sure to bring different disciplines together? So in terms of like plant pathologists, how do we make sure we also bring those elements into the big pictures? Because we all heard this morning or this afternoon about the talks, but none of them mentioned about, okay, climate change and trees, but how do we make sure that other disciplines come into the picture and so we can like share the data together to understand the bigger picture?
Well, it's a great question, but I think this is what the organizers of this meeting are doing. I mean, this is what we all hear, and the fact there is a plant pathogen scientist working attending is already a great sign. So cheers to the organizers and to the department in Birmingham to have this diversity of people. Now, to implement this in the field is a different thing. And again, having some specific areas where everyone can gather with a different skill set and disciplines would be a great asset. You're already doing this, but the problem is the challenge is to expand this to more places across the planet.
Alexander, do you want to comment, please?
Okay. What can we do? I think the first thing is realize events and meetings like this. Second, the communication inside the bubble and outside the bubble. I mean, Philippa, I think, told us today about the engagement of local stakeholders at the grassroots level. But I mean, also have to be engaged the decision makers and funding organizations to convince of the importance of plots, because the question is, you have a research project over 10 years. Why do you want to do more money? And then you will have to ask the people, why the Institute for Population Research, Human Population Research, or Meteorology does not stop his research activity. Trees do not stop increasing or dying, and so this communication to the decision makers is important to maintain the structure of plots. And I agree with Jérôme, who said yesterday that plots should not be preferably should not be financed or funded by international organizations, but by the local governments or the local institutions, funding institutions, because if they are external funded, they have not the sufficient enrooting in the society and in the structures of the society. I think this is important.
Thanks a lot, Alexander. Any comments on that from the panelists? No?
I agree entirely, except to say that in many parts of the world, my experience is that the funding isn't there politically at a national or regional level. And I'd probably include parts of the UK in that if I look closely. In other words, it's totally uneven, and we are at once local and global, right? That's the work we do. Yeah, so we just have to keep both perspectives in mind. And I think ideally everything should come from the bottom up, but we do need global standards, and we do need to make sure we're looking, including in really important places where economically are really challenged to fund any science, let alone plots. So that's the tension.
Okay, we will need to move to our second question, who is linked to what Alexander just pointed out, and Oliver as well. And how can we do global forest science in a fair and equitable way? And to kind of inspire you in your answers, we have this one more slide. Yeah, we have this slide from this paper by Asasi and collaborators, looking at the per capita GDP of the country versus the number of authorship. So that's basically who is included in a paper, and in forest, in ecology and conservation, the field of ecology and conservation. And you see there is this relationship between, well, the positive relationship. So the more money the country has, the more authorships it has. It will be interesting to color it by number of species maybe in each country. But so this is a paper that talks about this kind of changing the paradigm from parachute science, which is basically the science where someone just drops in the tropics and collect some data and go back to the global north, to actually global science when everyone is included and all voices are heard. So I want you to answer the question of how do you create equitable and fair global science based on, inspired maybe by this graph.
Shall I start again? Great. I mean, lots of ways. Oh, the graph's gone. I was going to complain about the graph that one axis wasn't standardized by population, and I thought, so I was wondering why it was that triangle. But actually, I think if the y-axis was standardized by population, it would be a real, maybe a straight line, maybe. I mean, that's a really hard question, and I think I kind of point to the things that we know we do, which help. So there are things like exchanges, sandwich student visits. There are things like ensuring that people from around the world have opportunities to study and learn. And now that's not just bringing people to the UK or other places in the north, partly because there's no money for it often, but also it's not like the appropriate thing. So it's also about a real international exchange of science. And that's something that networks can do. The other thing one can do is help connect people. And so that, the internet being a wonderful thing, the whole world, as you see today, is potentially connected. And that means that potentially somebody in, for example, DRC, could, as well as an author anywhere in the world, lead the kind of analyses that are locally, regionally, or nationally, or globally important. So that barrier of place has actually been broken down now. And we also have the tools in terms of data exchange. So that barrier has been broken down. There are obviously many other barriers that are still existing, but we need to work at them. And I'm optimistic that the situation is changing. And you see certainly in, I would say, some of the higher income tropical countries, the amount of research leadership coming out of them now is super impressive, and the trajectory is really positive. So I know we all have a responsibility to push that process on.
Well, maybe I can add a little bit from the lens of a remote sensing scientist. So remote sensing has been a very exclusive science in the past because data is very expensive and the software is very complicated. So a lot of people were excluded from using it. I think this has changed quite a bit in the past years with a lot of holdings, like satellite holdings, being open access now. Like the Landsat archive is completely free to access. All the archives from the European Space Agency completely free to access from everyone in the world. A lot of code being translated into open source software. There's the cloud services that you can use. So in theory, people just having a laptop and an internet connection could sit somewhere and map deforestation in the tropics. It sounds all nice, but I think still it needs a lot of training and kind of supporting people in doing it in the end. So I think the technological development is a little bit ahead of the human development, but still I think it's a very important movement that we have this open access movement in the technology-driven parts of forest science, because it really allows people to use those data sets.
I just didn't understand the graphics, but I would like to reiterate that as a scientist of the global north, I think I feel entitled and really privileged to be in a very dynamic community like we're having today. But of course, we also should have a role or a responsibility to sponsor or to be responsible for sites. Again, I'm going back to this idea of a place-based approach, where each one of us, we have in mind a specific forest where we've been working. So if we are working in tropical ecology, we should really be responsible for one place, at least, maybe a couple, not many more than that. And by being responsible, it means bringing back the money to the site, bringing back the scientists, collaborators, and make them discover this place, scientists, but also non-scientists to come to this place. And all of this creates an atmosphere that delivers good science, but also empowers the citizen to understand what we're talking about. So I think we can really have a local action in what we're doing as scientists by sponsoring specific sites, specific research stations. And I've been speaking to several of you, and you're doing this already. But I think there is a great value in this, and it's not being valued by some academic standards, being responsible for a site. And this is something we need to push forward and to value as a community.
Maybe in addition to that, I think as a modeler, I mean, I don't collect data. So I'm always asking people for, can you send me your data and can I use your data? And sometimes it's really difficult to get these data because people don't want to give away the data that they have measured with a lot of effort. That's totally clear. So I think it's super important to have very clear guidelines or rules on how data can be used by modelers or people that are interested in these data, and that would also make this sharing of the data much more easy.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think sometimes can be harder because sharing depends on trust as well. And so I think the idea of having guidelines or assessing the literature about how to build healthy global partnerships, it's very important. So you can build that trust and people be willing to share. But also, I think clear communication, I don't know how to make sure that people that are contributing to the data can also be invited to participate on the direction of the research, or how to consider also their scientific ideas. Sometimes the momentum you get into a collaboration vary, of course, but I'm sure some people would value a lot if they could be invited before when the questions are being made, just not just about getting the data to test something. So I think that's important. And because of the graph about the parachute science, of course, that can happen across global north and global south, but that can also happen, for example, intra-countries. In the context of Brazil, we have lots of inequalities in terms of economy. So I came from the southeast, which is economically advantaged compared to the north. So if I'm coming from the south of Brazil and doing research in the Amazon and not giving anything back, I'm just replicating colonialism and parachute science. So we should also consider that could happen intra-country, not just across the globe.
Yeah, and thanks. All that's fantastic. And you're touching on much deeper issues as we carry on discussing this. Now, underlying all this is really deep histories, right? That's important. There's also massive economic inequality, as you say, within country and within country. And so there is no way we can address that question, I think, without massive economic transfer of resources. Now, there's many ways of doing that, but certainly within science, as folks have touched upon, we have to be cognizant when we ask for money that we're not just asking for money in the north, that there's a real major program of training and engagement going on. But we also make the case for something bigger, that our governments funding science need to think beyond their borders. And, at the moment, that's particularly challenging, but it's really, really important because we're, in the end, we're all just global citizens, and this is our role.
Any comments from the audience?
Just leave it. Okay. I just wanted to complement. I mean, echoing what everybody mentioned here, that also there is any way. I mean, make sure that when we go to the field, for example, we agreeing with what Felipe mentioned in Brazil, we will also have this type of colonialism in science as well. But make sure that when we go, we really, to the field, really engage in the sense that value scientifically as well what people in the ground has to offer. Because I don't know, I have the feeling from a remote sensing perspective as well. I mean, I'm a biologist and also work with remote sensing. Sometimes I feel that lack a little bit. This can be not only in knowledge, in the acknowledgement, for example, of papers. I mean, being a bit more specific, but of course, it's a very complex thing. But just a small thing, for example, in co-authorships of papers, and not only in knowledge. Perhaps this doesn't kind of, okay, maybe people in the field are not interested in that, but I think is a way to recognize between the authors, for example, of papers, for example, people that help in the field, the botanists, the people work helping to measure the trees or things like that. I think this is one of the things that could be added in the discussion as well, and of course, be clear the benefits that the community will get from the scientific community. I think this also helps you to build a lot of trust and improve the relationship. Ensure the exactly.
Thank you. Oops. Any more comments from the audience? Any comments online, Tom? No?
I think.
Okay, yeah, okay, one more comment.
Since I'm holding the microphone, I feel like I have some power here, which is perhaps unfair. But just to follow that comment, I wonder if there's a specific thing we could do about our criteria for co-authorship that would begin to break these barriers, break this problem down. There's something concrete we could do there. I mean, I think there's sort of basis to build on. The credit system, I think, is a really good taxonomy. But that's not enough. Just, you know, that's not sufficient. That doesn't get us out of asking the question, are we setting the criteria correctly for our co-authorship? There's some responses, so I want to.
We went through an exercise a couple of weeks ago with Adriane and Felipe of looking through the data sharing agreements of the different networks, the plot network specifically. So this is what we're here for. And it was really quite interesting to see the diversity of approaches taken by different networks, all of them in good faith, but very different in their philosophy. They are all mentioning explicitly the type of problems we're mentioning, equitable treatment of everyone. But they were some of them were very top down, very strict, and others were really vague. The best option is, you know, it's like the law. What is the best approach to enforcing some regulation across across the people? So it's across scientists. So I'm not sure there is a good answer to this, because at the heart of it, what we are engaged in is science, and science, I strongly believe, is a social process. There is not an absolute truth to it. So we have to be cognizant of this and make sure that we go beyond paperwork and data sharing agreements and go towards, you know, listening to each other in a more symmetrical way. Yeah, but data sharing agreements would help, and probably you have more to comment on.
Yeah. No, thanks. I think from my perspective, actually, I think the problem is not really the plot or where is the plot is going to be. It's about training. I think Oliver Philippe you'll not build this network without people, okay? But I can give you one clear example that one wave that really transformed the science in Brazil was the LBA project. Richard probably was involved. No, I was involved very deeply. And the great things about LBA, when Diana Wickland put the project together in Brazil, was one brew. You have to have a Brazilian collaborator. Okay, what happened is after 10 years, 3,000 Brazilians got PhD and they are leading the science in Brazil. So it's very difficult to talk about anything about in Brazil, about the Amazon, because they are Brazilians in the field looking and search for data, and they have a deeply knowledge, different what happened, for example, in Africa. So it's not about plots, I think about training. That's the key question, key point.
I just want to add to the authorship question. I also see, I completely agree with everything that was said. And I also like the idea of like having concrete action plans, like credit statements and stuff like that. I also see that I think editors of journals are in part responsible for making sure that all the people that contribute to a paper actually included. And I think having a little bit of diversity in editors also from different regions and regional editors with the big journals, I think would be a very necessary step in doing this, just to add to this.
One remark, Adrian. Adrian?
Yes, Alexander. Yes, can you?
One remark. I think we have two aspects. One is the scientific acknowledgement with co-authorship and so on. But the other thing is to be able to really fairly pay the data collectors that are not PhD students or something like this. So there are people that they are living with collecting data. And we pay them for 5 months, 6 months, a year, and the rest of the time they have to look for other things. And this is, if you do it 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, this is very disappointing because these people have no decent insurance, social insurance, for example, and they're highly specialized and trustworthy people that collect this data with a great efforts. And under this perspective, I think this idea of somehow structured transfer system could be good for empowerment, scientific empowerment, and social justice of people that are involved with maintenance of data sets and plots and so on.
Thank you very much, Alexander. Susanne?
Yeah, I've been a bit silent on this since I'm a European researcher working on Europe, so I haven't had so many so many things on this topic. But I think this was a very kind of nice or kind of good point about the data collectors and kind of how that they are paid and funded. If we compare to the situation in Europe, where me and Paloma and many others are using forest inventory data, and that's like professionals who are doing this for as their full-time job to provide this information. And this is, of course, like an amazing material and data. And the reason that it's collected in this way is, of course, that it's kind of forests, it sees forests as an economic resource. And this is kind of not collected for cool science, but collected for kind of also economic reasons. And later in this LULUCF climate regulation kind of motivations. So, yeah, so it's again a problem of funding and kind of seeing kind of scientific data collection as something that you do with small projects, and there is no like institutional commitment and funding in kind of collecting the data that would be so important for so many things. And now it's just, we're trying to just rapid kind of get it through small projects and inadequate funding.
Anyone has a question? I was just stimulated by all that. I was actually thinking, of course, we just come out of 2 years of COVID, right? And we know in every country that's accentuated inequalities and really pose all sorts of challenges. And it's kind of, again, we look in the UK, we kind of learned who are the key workers. Actually, to be honest, they're not really the folks in this room, most of us. I mean, probably some exceptions, I'm sure, but there are other people, and I often think of the people who are collecting these data, installing the plots and doing the botanical work and everything are the key workers. And I would just love to work in a world where everyone could value them properly and ensure that they had full-time jobs. That, you know, as a start, that would be fantastic. Social security would be great. Yeah, so it comes back to what we value. To come back to your point, Pollyanna and Rob, I agree. And I think the other thing we look at our own biases. We privilege intellectual work and analysis, I don't know, being a public figure, all these things, over a lot of work which is just not less visible, which is equally as important. And you know, probably if we're honest, most of us look at how we live our lives and write our papers, and we're probably all open to some criticism in that sense. So yeah, bringing all sorts of people into the science process is our challenge.
Yes, thank you, Oliver. Just to finish a little bit with this discussion, maybe I was wondering if including some ethical guidelines in calls of projects, national projects. I think having this discussion and having this type of papers published and raising up these things, at least is very important for the community to think about it, and maybe start to make some small changes in that sense could be, I don't know, if important.
Is there a question there, Rob? Yeah.
I thought you were just torturing me. I had my hand up. I think we've touched on a really important point here around professionalization. I'm really, really grateful for Susanna bringing that word into our conversation here, which is not entirely an academic audience. There is actually a very brilliant professional services team here. So, I mean, of course, we're in a very lucky position in Birmingham and for all kinds of reasons. But that not to gainsay the training aspect and PhDs, but just the thing that makes the Global Atmospheric Watch work, to go back to Alexander's point about how meteorologists and climatologists can do it, it's because there are professional, not academic meteorologists. So I think that's really, really a key element here for us to pick up. Oh, no, Bruno. We're just going to have to wait.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to maybe mention one other potential aspect related to that graph that might be related to equitability in science, which is just language. At least in Brazil, English speaking, it's very limiting. Like most people don't speak English, and they don't have access to education that will teach them English. And if you don't have this basic tool, you won't have access to most of the scientific information, and you won't be able to communicate your thoughts. And I've seen so many people who are just brilliant, and they're just dropping out of academia because they just, at some point, they cannot move on. Or some people that want to go and stay in academia, they just can't stay because the English language is a requirement for you to study in Brazil. And that's one point that's probably more easily addressed, maybe not on the short term, but it doesn't require too many funds, possibly. I mean, the universities are there, the people are there. For some reason, people are still not speaking English in a way that they can contribute the way they wanted to science internationally. And that's just a requirement.
We have one more question from Reach. And we do have more questions to discuss, but maybe we'll have to leave some for the drinks reception.
I just wanted to comment on the earlier comment about the role of journals and editors. As an editor of New Phytologist, which is up there, I know we put a really high priority on developing an editorial board that is diverse, gender diversity, geographic diversity. There's gaps, and it's difficult sometimes to get editor to represent a certain region, but we work on it. There's also a pretty big effort in developing early career folks to be, come into the editorial process, and the same with reviewers. But I'm not, the notion of an editor, when I look at a paper, I'm not sure I have ability to say whether the authorship is correct. Of course, we, like most journals, ask for the list of author contributions at the end, but I don't think I have a role in doing that. That's up to the primary authors. But I'd be interested in Oliver's reaction on one thing. I mean, you're an author on many papers with like 100 authors, right? And what does the person who's the 74th author on a paper with 100 authors, does that person get decent credit for being listed that way? Or is there perhaps some other way to, because, you know, as a reader, I don't focus on those names.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think it depends what you're looking at. I think some people do. I think actually in some countries, it actually translates into income in some academic systems. And so actually, you know, it is important. And that's great, actually, because I mean, you know, although it sounds mercenary, but it is actually good because they're getting some recognition beyond being 74th author. But I also think it is the responsibility, as you say, of the lead author or lead authorship group to get it right. But people like networks and groups like, you know, the proto group that's here today, we have responsibility also for providing that steering as well. It's one of the things that gets me quite worked up sometimes, but anyway. But I do recommend it, you know, if in doubt, err on the side of inclusivity. I mean, that's really always makes sense. But it's more than just being a name. And engaging when there's hundreds of co-authors is really hard, of course, because everyone's busy, apart from anything else. But we have to acknowledge that some people have contributed before that really academic process, and those contributions are really important.
We have 10 minutes, so maybe we can start a new question. I don't know if we can you put how many plots? I can read out the question. I think. Yeah. So forests are changing, and the ways that human interacts with forests will have to change in response. So what do we need to change about the way we study forests to include the human aspect better? And I have an answer from Ida, actually. She provided an answer, and then of course you have to comment as well, but no. So not only forests are changing, but local and indigenous peoples too. We are losing traditional ecological knowledge, tech, which could be used to complement Western science approaches, such as monitoring changes in forests. Tech, the traditional ecological knowledge, cultural values, and traditional authorities could be better integrated into promoting forest conservation, sustainable use of forests, and forest restoration. We need to move from multidisciplinarity, interdisciplinarity, engaging with societies, sociologists, anthropologists, lawyers, and very importantly, from participatory approaches to real transdisciplinary approaches, to really creating science with society, not science for society. So any other comments? We have a comment there.
Or a question.
I want to highlight 2 points mentioned here. One, interdisciplinary projects. The other one is language, not in sense of English or other languages. The language we use in our disciplines, engineering, sciences, etc. I think that's a challenge to find a common language between, for example, engineering, natural sciences, or any other discipline we are coming from. When we talk to each other, that's a challenge. For example, a clear example is, for example, uncertainty. In engineering discipline, for example, uncertainty is much lower in many cases than the project we see in natural sciences. So when you know, a kind of interdisciplinary project is discussed to both audience, the sense they have might be different. The other challenge is to get funding for these kind of projects. So when we want to describe, different methodologies from different disciplines, again, the funders have different kind of senses. How do you think we can overcome these challenges?
More difficult questions?
Well, I think I have the impression that there's a lot of funding going on for interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary projects, much more than like 10 years ago or so. I think this is very much recognized that this is necessary, this communication between the disciplines. But on the other hand, I also think that this takes so much time to get this communication started that when the project is finished, you are at a point where you finally can talk to each other and can understand each other, so that then we are again back at the point where we would need longer funding periods to really get this collaboration established. And yeah, this is super difficult and it requires really a long, long time.
No comment. To pass on the mic.
Hello. First of all, I'm thankful to all of you to have your time. Basically, I'm the ethnobotanist working on the indigenous knowledge in a remote area. And I have two main points. Like in a country where I am working is a diverse vegetation. Like we have from subtropical to alpine, all type of vegetation. But due to the funding restriction or economic restriction, they are still unexplored. It's my suggestion, maybe like the people who are working at the global level, why you people are not like here mostly focus on the Europe or in a Brazil, and why you people are not considering the developing countries. And if you take a collaborator for some, if you write a project at the global level, having a collaborator from the developing countries, then you may have some more explore some new things, like the area where I am living is a Kashmir, which is a highly diversity rich. Even it is called as a second heaven on the earth, like a diversity rich, but still unexplored due to the some technological restrictions, and also like we do not have much access to the satellite imageries. But if you people focus on some strands or the plots in that area and you have collaborator at that area, I think this will contribute a lot at the global level. And the second thing on the if you why we are studying or why we are discussing about the interdisciplinary knowledges, many traditional communities are restricted in remote countries or in developing countries like Pakistan. We have still have communities who have a lot of knowledge about the foods, food plants, medicine plants, and the things like that. And if we done some sort of studies and identify some novel uses, and then go toward their we compare these studies, or we use the local perceptions or local knowledge along with these approaches like remote sensing and the things like that, I think this will contribute a lot in protecting our sustainable utilization of resources in future. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I can add something. So I agree that it's really important to have local collaborators, but sometimes it's really difficult to get the perfect contact point to finding somebody. And I think this is where networks come into play that have kind of already a network that you can utilize and ask in the network, do you know somebody from, I don't know, Siberia, whoever, I want to work there and they have a cool project. Is there a local person I can contact? I think this is very important to build those networks to actually reach out to people, because I mean, it's really hard to randomly email people and ask whether they want to join a project. So yeah, that's what I wanted to add.
Yeah, thank you. Well, important questions and quite difficult questions, but echo what you say, Cornelius. That's one way, of course. I think part of it's responsibility on, if you like, networks to be open, and I get that sense, real strong sense here today, that I'm not just talking about forest plots. I'm talking about the whole community here. I think we've become much more open and welcoming to each other, and I hope to people elsewhere. And I'm really conscious in forest plots, that's really important. So that's what we say. If people have plots, they want to be involved wherever you are, you're very welcome. So that doesn't totally answer your question. The other thing I actually just wanted, what you said, maybe you want to actually pay personal tribute to two colleagues of mine who are no longer with us, but actually inspired kind of pretty much everything that we've been doing. And these are just a father and son in Tambopata in southern Peru, who taught me pretty much everything they knew about their forest. And it was such a wonderful experience that actually inspired me, and that made me connect to the place in a way that wouldn't happen if otherwise. This is Jerome's point. I now feel that love for that place and for people there that I wouldn't otherwise feel. And that's a result of a human connection of people using the forest, collecting the plants for their health and their well-being, and just witnessing that was a great privilege. So.
Thank you very much. We are out of time, and I think that was a very good note to finish the panel discussion. And I thank you everyone for staying up to this late, and thank you everyone online and all the panelists here for the great discussion and many inspiring ideas. And we now have a poster session and also a drink reception at the poster area. And just enjoy, and thank you everyone. Thank you all the volunteers for today, and thank you the IT people for saving us at times. So I hope you enjoy, and then applause for the panelists.